1, 2. All right. I got a loud voice anyway. I'm really so glad that you're all here, and I'm especially glad to be here with you two because I've been following this project since volume 1, and I feel like we're on parallel tracks because I've been obsessing about fire for 8 years now. I've been basically living and breathing it in all senses. And one of the frustrations I've been feeling as a writer is I'm kind of stuck in my black and white and straight lines and prose, and so many other feelings come up and so many other images come up. And that I just had to kind of go by or just, and I could wish that there was a place for them, but there wasn't really any. And then the Blanton Art Museum in Austin, Texas did a show on climate change art. And that was the first time I saw it addressed. And then the McMichael Museum did something in Toronto. But the idea of a book where you have people who aren't just formal artists, but citizens, firefighters, survivors, all able to contribute to this kind of kaleidoscopic experience of fire. I mean, what's amazing is, right, like 10 years ago, if we had asked randomly this audience, have you had personal experience with fire? A big fire, most people, it would be a very random yes or no. And now, everybody has seen smoke, at least, and a lot of us have seen fire. We've certainly had, seen the news or met people who've been evacuated now. I think probably every single person in Canada knows somebody who's been evacuated due to fire, and that was not a decade ago. That was not the case. And so what you're doing here, what I feel like Amory and Liz are allowing us to kind of work through is become acquainted with this new energy and help grapple with what it means. And fire, we've done such a good job of suppressing it, and yet fire is so central to who human beings are from the very beginning. Like before Homo sapiens, Homo habilis and Australopithecus, we all interacted with fire. Chimpanzees interact with fire. They relate to fire. And so it goes back all the way to our origins, and now it's so well engineered, we can jump in a car and tear down here, and there's a raging fire under the hood, thousands of them burning and exploding, and we don't hear a thing. And yet, it's absolutely central to our mobility, central to most of our heating systems. Everything in this room has been processed, mediated through fire. And so what's happening now, and what you're helping us do, I feel, is get reacquainted with the actual element. And what I'd love to know is what were the entry points for you?
Yeah, I mean, I was reflecting on this in terms of, my own entry into getting interested in fire. It would have started the summer of 2017, which was the first summer in BC that we sort of had wildfire smoke in Vancouver I remember it for being 6 weeks straight. And I think, walking around in downtown Vancouver and just feeling this like really amorphous sense of dread and not knowing what to do with it and feeling this like animal-like fear that like I need to run away, I'm in danger, and yet holding this contradiction of like, well, my house isn't going to burn down, where am I going to go? Like this smoke is this pervasive thing that just can, communicate at a long distance about imagery I was seeing in the news about evacuations, in Williams Lake and Quesnel and that region. So I think that my wildfire work actually started the winter of 2017, and I was just trying to make sense of what happened, and I thought, as a painter, if I paint fire directly, maybe that will be a way to kind of make sense of these things. And from there, 2017 feels like it was the beginning of what we now know in BC is kind of almost every summer, it's fire season, with little reprieves here and there. So I think for me, it was a way of thinking about fire really directly as a way to deal with this anxiety that I just didn't know where to place it. And I think something that's really stuck with me throughout the years of working with wildfire in my own art practice and working on the fire season book is that the metaphor of a fire comes up repeatedly for so many losses that humans can experience in a life. So whether or not you've had your house burned down and you've lost all your possessions and you've lost your town and your community, we've had death of close loved ones, we've had divorces, we've had separations or huge upheavals without knowing what the future is going to be. And I think that fire offers this comfort for me in a way of like, this is natural, like this, there is a type of naturalness to like a letting go and new beginnings. And again, like we talked about the contradictions in fire, and yet, you know, there's a naturalness, and yet the scale of fires that we're seeing, the severity is not natural. This is human caused climate change that's causing the severity of these fires and the frequency to be as much as they are now. So again, it's that contradiction of like the naturalness and the unnaturalness. Yeah.
It's almost what I think of is it's got a kind of cyborg, kind of human and then kind of sort of natural and then human created. Elements. I forget what's the word for that when you have a
Anthropomorphic?
Human, yeah, well, a human who's also got machinery inside it. Yeah, cyborg. Yeah. So there is that sort of element to the fire. Anyway, Amory. So what's your way into this project?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest in the States, in Indiana, in like flat agricultural corn and soy fields. Wildfire was like, I had never experienced it. I'd never seen it. I'd hardly heard about it. And then I moved to Oregon about 10 years ago, and was in grad school there for visual art, and did a residency in Central Oregon outside of Sisters, where there had been a very large wildfire gone through about 10 or 15 years previously. And so my residency there for a few weeks was just in this landscape of small manzanita bushes and black tree snags that had been burned into charcoal years ago. And I started breaking pieces of the charcoal off the trees and drawing those trees. Just as a sort of a curiosity. And it was the first time I'd ever been in a burn, and living in Portland, it was the first summer that I'd ever experienced smoke coming into the city. And it was really novel to me. It was kind of cool. Like, I was like, oh, the red sun, it looks so awesome. But very quickly, and like talking to other people who were interested in fire ecology and fire succession and things like that, really got fascinated by it. And then shortly after that, I entered a time of kind of personal loss in my life, and fire again was kind of there to tell me something about resiliency or catastrophic change. And also I started working almost exclusively in charcoal as a medium and feeling connected to some sort of cycle of life and death in the natural world, and kind of processing ideas of that through the drawings I was making, through the landscape drawings I was making, and fire was just this fascinating thing. There's a reason hundreds of thousands of years later we still sit around a campfire and just stare, right? Like, it's comforting. It's magical. It's almost hard to explain, and I just feel drawn to it over and over. Every time I feel like I've kind of gotten to the end of my thoughts on it, somebody writes an amazing essay in our next book, and I'm just like thrust back into this fascination again. And I think Liz and I can both agree that like what our perspectives were about wildfire when we started this project 4 years ago have changed significantly since then, just based on what we've experienced from other contributors.
Well, I'd really like to know more about that. Before I get into that, there's a rule in improvisational theater where you never refuse an offer. So, if you're there up on stage and someone hands you, take my light bulb, you don't say this is a milk carton. You just take the light bulb and you have to go with it. And I feel like that's kind of what you did, that fire came into your lives and you could have, you know, tuned it out and say, well, I can't wait till this is over and things get back to normal. Or you can sense a kind of shift in the zeitgeist and, oh, this might be around here for a while. I should probably get curious. And that's, you know, what artists do. It's what journalists, writers do. And so it feels like to me you both kind of accepted the offer. And it was not probably what you were planning that summer. And I sure wasn't in 2017 to watch the skies turn orange. And that was certainly, you know, what folks in New York City weren't planning on last June 2023. And there's, I think there's a lot of us are still fighting it though. And there's also a real sense of loss. And there's a piece in here by Caitlin French, and she was saying it was surreal to watch the massive cloud of smoke rising over the hill in West Kelowna as people were swimming, wakeboarding, and hanging out on the beach. I stood at the edge of Okanagan Lake watching the smoke rise for an hour, 30 minutes before I realized the cloud was getting narrower as it crested the hill. The fire engulfed everything in its path. And so people are, you know, had this plan for their day, they had this vision for their summer, and then there's this intruding energy. And, you know, you've taken that intruding energy and turned it into 3 really beautiful books that I think will be real documents for this historical moment we're in as we become reacquainted with fire. But how do you experience the dissonance? And is it a conscious decision to try to go with it, or do you find yourself fighting it too?
I guess my initial thought is just like it's hard. It's still hard to know what to do about it. Like it's hard to know how to feel about it. It's scary, and I think we get a kind of insider view on a lot of different perspectives in the books because we hear from people who live in dense urban centers who are just getting the sort of novelty, smoky afternoon, the pink dot in the sky. And then we're also getting works from people.
I just got to stop right there. So the pink dot in the sky.
Yeah.
I think everybody in this room knows what that means, right? But 8 years ago, I don't think we would have. The pink dot in this, you know, do you have a floater? You know, what's the deal? You know, and but we all know that now. I mean, like our language, our visual language, our just the fact that I knew exactly what you meant, and pink dot in the sky. But anyway, I cut you off.
That's okay.
I had to point that out. We're really, in real time, shifting into a kind of different understanding of the world.
Yeah, and I feel like for each, I mean, at least I can say for myself that there have been like a series of thresholds where I'm just like, I don't have enough brain space to hold all of my wonderings about this, or at other times it feels like, what can I do about it? Like, I'm just gonna turn away. I just need to turn away. I mean, I guess one of a sort of latent benefit or a surprise benefit of working on this project is like the different stories just keep coming in and different perspectives keep coming in. And we get the stories of people who are like, this is the first time I've ever experienced this. And then we get stories from people who are like, my entire town just burned down. And there's other people who are like, what do I do now? Or looking at the labor of it. People we get these contributions from people who fight wildfires. And that's a life in a world that is so far away from my comfortable life here. That it just, I always get to that point where I'm just like, that's all we got. And then somebody else is like, but what about this? And then it's like, ooh, yes, what about that? We need to make another book.
So I want to jump in again because it takes courage to do that. It really does. And I feel like each of these works, as I was looking at them, are kind of individual acts of courage. to really face it and grapple with it. You know, this is unstable, unpredictable energy that's intruding into their lives, and they're coming back and trying to not necessarily make peace with it, but at least come to some kind of grips with it. And so I feel like, you know, this is a courageous work, and I feel like by engaging with it, we can become braver. And that's what, you know, I felt reading it. I felt emboldened. You know, wow, these people are having these really intense experiences, because I live in a pretty protected, so far, situation also. And yet I can feel it kind of nibbling at the edges. You know, I've seen the pink dot, I've seen the smoke, I've seen some fire, and these folks have really gone into it, and they've come out with a story to tell, and they're, you know, they're still among us. So you can live through it and actually create something really beautiful. So that is, you know, super inspiring, and I think a lot of us, you know, are at different stages of awareness and awakening to this energy. And I grew up in the East Coast of the U.S., and it's on fire right now. There have been 500 fires in the state of New Jersey, which is a small state, just this fall. So there's a 5,000-acre fire burning on the New York-New Jersey border right now that's driving evacuations. It killed a firefighter. You know, these are things you hear about in Colorado or BC or Alberta, not in little old New England. And so it's, you know, it's all over the place. But Liz, yeah, dissonance and all that.
Yeah, I think Emery talked about like reaching these thresholds and how things just, I feel a flip, like I feel a shift, and it kind of feels permanent. And so I think I talked about 2017 being kind of the first time that wildfire entered my psychic realm. And I think another time that was another threshold for me was the summer of 2021. So I was living in Vernon, BC during the heat dome. It was 48 degrees while I was there. I had friends visiting during the heat dome. We went from the lake to the river to my air-conditioned house at the time. And Lytton burned down a couple days before I left Vernon, and I was driving to another artist residency in Wells in the North Interior. And that was the first time in my life driving into Wells, I became very aware that I was driving into a town with one road in and one road out that was an hour away from the next town, and it was surrounded by forest that had been decimated by the mountain pine beetle. So a very sick forest as you come driving into town. And looking back, I spent that month in like a state of mourning and grief, and I was very anxious and went from looking at the news to not looking at the news. And I just remember a day that smoke had settled into the Bowron Valley, and there was a fire in Bowron Provincial Park, but it was far enough away. When fires are in parks, often they just monitor them. It was small enough, it was being monitored. Okay, there's nothing to worry about. But it was a smoky afternoon in the valley. I wanted to go for a hike, and I went for a hike that didn't have a lookout because I realized I'm not going to see anything. But I went out in the forest, and in Wells in July, all the wildflowers are blooming, and I saw a mother grouse with her babies, and I saw a toad hobbling along the trail, and butterflies and bugs, and yeah, just had this experience alone in the woods. I went hiking alone by myself, and I was very afraid of bears, so I just had a can with a keychain on it that I was just using as a makeshift bear bell the whole time. And when I was hiking up the mountain, I heard helicopters, and I thought, okay, well, I think these helicopters are probably just out checking on the fire in Bowron Lake. But because Lytton was so fresh in my mind, I just convinced myself, like, maybe there's a fire at the edge of town. And I started hiking down the mountain, and as I got sort of further and further down the mountain, I was just making a mental list in my head of, okay, what would I evacuate? What would I take with me? Okay, my favorite dress, I think I can grab my computer. Okay, I won't have time to go to the studio, so my paintings are gone. Okay, and what else is at the studio right now? Okay, my headphones, those are gone, that's gone, that's gone. Okay, so I just was running this mental list by myself, and I got back to town, and obviously everything was fine. And I just had the impulse when I got home not to shower the sweat and the bug spray off me, but to go into the river. So there's a river in Wells that you go swimming in called the Wye. And as I was walking to the river, I just started crying. And I just had this real release of like realizing that I both felt like the possibility of loss felt so present, and yet I felt like more in love with the world than I ever had been, and more, this feeling of connection with flowers and trees and birds and all that actually was available with the reality of possibility of loss. And we live with that all the time, constantly, right? Like that's just the human condition. And I think that was just, there's these moments where I really feel it. And there is a sense of relief sometimes in the feeling it, because I think sometimes the dissonance is the not feeling it. And I think that's what I'm so often reminded of with these pieces, like how, like you're saying, it's brave to feel it. And I think sometimes what artists are doing is we're feeling it for everyone who can't feel it. And I don't blame you for not feeling it. It's really hard. And I can dip in and out of it, and I can't feel it 100% of the time. And I think just that cognitive dissonance is just part and parcel of what happens. And I feel thankful sometimes when I get to feel it, and it's really intense. But there's a gratefulness and actually seeing the reality. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I think I see kind of an analog there in how we treat the land. In a way, we've been the colonial project. One of its elements, which has been in the past century, to suppress fire. The same way languages were suppressed, cultural practices were suppressed, all kinds of indigenous activities and ways of being were suppressed. And what I feel now is, there's a dissonance there too that has become intolerable on the landscape. And so I see fire as almost a rebellion against that. That a century of fire suppression and the buildup of fuels, the changing of the climate because of fossil fuel burning and beetle kill, has created this kind of this buildup of tension that wants to be released and is being released. And there's a poem in here called Wallpaper by Stephanie Duran Castillo, and she's from Latin America, and she's moved here, and she's talking about how beautiful it was to be in British Columbia. When I moved to British Columbia, I felt I was living inside a wallpaper, so pretty, so wet, so blue, so green, like a maddening postcard of endless perfection. And in a way, that's kind of how Vancouver is sold to the public. But fire, what's missing from that picture is regular fire, which would have been normal 100 years ago or 200 years ago. And then she says later, the British garden failed. The wild people were arrested. The forest never liked the rules, so the wallpaper burns. And I really feel like that's what's happening now. The illusion that we tried to impose on the landscape isn't holding up. It's cracking under the strain. And fire is just one expression of that. And so, with this project are leaning into that. In some ways, more honest way of being on this landscape, which has always known fire, and known fire in a regular and rhythmic way. And do you see an evolution over the 3 volumes you've done? Do you see an evolution in consciousness around fire?
Yeah, I think when we first started doing the books, one thing I think even one hesitation we had was like, once the book is printed and published, that's it. Like, will a book we published 4 years ago seem out of date? Or like, will ideas change so drastically, that we'll have, I don't know, some feeling, this feeling of it being out of date. And I think what's happened is each one of these books kind of serves as like a time capsule of what was happening at the time, right? So this book was, the call for submissions came out after the summer of 2023, which again, I think was another threshold point where Toronto, Montreal, New York, all these areas in the East Coast that had never experienced wildfire smoke before had it hanging around in their cities. And I actually, that summer, I was doing an artist residency on Toronto Island. And during that week, I was there with a group of artists dealing with the climate crisis in their work. So we had gathered on Toronto Island. to think through some of these ideas together. And the second day we were there was when the smoke settled into Toronto. And a lot of the people who were at the residency with me were from Toronto and Montreal, and they were like, what is this? And I was like, yes, that familiar smell. Like, does anyone have like a feeling of like nostalgia when it gets smoky? Like, you're just like, oh yeah, this smell. Like it, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Yeah. And my initial instinct actually was interesting. I thought like, good, I want you guys to feel it. Like, I felt this kind of smugness was the first thing that came up for me. And then I thought, well, what's under that smugness? And what I actually want is a shared connection with other people that like we're in this together, right? Like what I actually wanted under the smugness was connection. And that was something that we grappled with and we talked through together that week we were together. And yeah, I feel very lucky that timing just so happened to work out and open some other conversations. And yeah, so that, like I said, I think every book also like gets attached to summer for me and my personal experiences and what I was thinking about and what I was working through, and I think we see it reflected in the submissions that come in.
We've definitely gotten like the kind of awareness about wildfire and maybe the connections it has to, I want to say science in a way, have become more prominent, or like the practical relationships to fire versus the sort of metaphorical meanings that fire has in individual lives. There's like the first book had a lot of sort of waxing poetic about endings and new beginnings and your life burning down and new growth sprouting out from your heart, that kind of thing. Not to get too woo-woo about it, but like and then the second book seemed more like, we got more submissions of people who were like, I was there. I saw it happen. Or my friend saw it happen. And then the third book is like, there's a lot. Actually, I think the third book, which we touched on in the presentation, was like, there's a little more awareness around cultural burning practices, around wildfire fighting practice or labor. There's more like feet on the ground, hands in the dirt kind of experience with wildfire. And so it's like, it keeps getting more real in a kind of way through the series, I think. Like it's not just this like concept that we think of like the pink dot in the sky. It's not this concept that's like far away, where we know something's happening, but it's like way over there on the other side of the mountains. And there's hectares and data connected to it that we read on our newsfeed on our phone. Now it's like, seems like more and more the books are like starting to incorporate people who are thinking creatively about wildfire, but also have firsthand experience with it. And so it's, like I said, it's becoming more real or tangible or something.
We're just about at the end of the conversation portion. One last thing I wanted to mention was, I couldn't find the piece in here, but there's a woman describing being on the land doing a prescribed burn, and which is a controlled burning event. And she was saying how this is a place you could bring your kids. Like, a low-level fire is a safe, kind of comforting thing to be around. And our ancestors all did it. Wherever you're from, unless you're from the Arctic, your ancestors did it at some point. And indigenous people did it until recently, and many colonial farmers also did it. And so it's a normal thing, but that idea of it being this social event where you all get together and we're going to do a burn today, and getting back to that feeling of comfort. And it's not totally in control, but we're near it. And chimps have been observed being around wildfires, and they hang out around the edges of fire the same way in a family group, and it's really, really interesting. Anyway, maybe we can kind of get into that in the questions, because that's kind of where ultimately, we need to get to as a society, is how to be more comfortable with it. So this is the Q&A period. We're entering that now. We've got about 15 minutes, And does anyone want to start us off with a question? Yeah, hi.
It's not really a question, it's more a comment, because you're talking about 2017 being a great moment for you, but I remember the Okanagan Mountain Fire of 2003.
Yeah.
That's 21 years ago.
Yeah.
And, you know, that was kind of an outlying event at the time, but it was a pretty significant fire. I think it's kind of been on our radar for a lot longer.
Yeah.
I actually, my family used to go to Oliver every summer, and I do remember that fire because I remember coming out of a restaurant with my parents and being like, "What is that?"
It's big news.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we're seeing more and more, you know, as fires are getting closer to larger and larger urban areas. So we have the McDougall Creek fire, you know, impacting West Kelowna. You drive through Kelowna, you still see the fire, like you see where it is. And I remember watching news reports and being like, I know where that reporter is on the highway. Like I know that exit. So I think that, yeah, as these fires are getting closer and closer to these larger urban areas and they're affecting larger populations, I think that's another reason why they're getting bigger in our psyche. Yeah. And
they're also like not, I think the fires used to be sort of anomalies or like, there's like a really big one that everybody remembers and then there's a 10 or 15 year stretch where like nothing really happens. But then just in the last 5 years, 10 years, it's like, it's not like the big cataclysmic event that only happens once in a generation. It's like 500 of them every summer.
And I think the anomaly is the off year.
Right,
like
like this
happens
summer
is the
was
anomaly
strange,
now.
right?
Yeah, we really got off easy in Vancouver.
But Jasper,
Sure, yeah.
Do you have another question? Anyway, hey there.
I remember way back into the 80s, and I didn't remember as many huge fires, but I remember all across the states was, we can't have controlled burns because people are living in the mountains now.
Yeah.
People are choosing
Yeah.
to go. And so I'm looking in the Yukon all the way from Carcross to Whitehorse. They're putting a fire, you know, widening, one of those horrible things.
Fire break. Yeah.
But they're putting it going to the north, and I'm thinking, I don't understand why they're not doing a controlled burn. And I just wondered your thoughts on that.
On why just the tension between people now building in the WUI, building into the wildland-urban interface, and now, you know, there are values there, there are people in there, so we can't do a controlled burn. Do you want to, because that's a dissonance too, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and I also remember watching a presentation from a forester who also talked about, you know, a lot of controlled burning happening in BC up until the 90s, and it was a lot of doctors in northern BC who actually petitioned to have it stopped because of air quality issues. Wow. So I mean, prescribed burning and controlled burning, there are issues. There will be smoke, right? But from what I've heard is like, you can just pick the time of year the smoke happens. That's basically like what our choice is now. And we can have it be controlled, and we can be burning in the winter on days where the venting index is good and the smoke is going to get blown away. And, you know, people can be warned if they have to stay inside, if they have respiratory illnesses. Or it can just burn uncontrolled in the summer. Like, take your pick, kind of.
Yeah. Hi.
That leads me right into smoke and fire, because fire is, you know, very dramatic. But my sister and brother-in-law who lived in San Francisco, they had to move. They had to leave, and a lot of people are suffering because of this amorphous smoke instead of the fire, you know, but smoke is going to be, it is the analogy that it's, well, they're intimately combined.
Yeah.
And so I think it's fire and smoke we're talking about, really, from my point of view. Because they're the same thing, they're part and parcel.
Can I just jump in real quick? We were talking about this in the green room, that we actually live in one of the least smoky times in history, and because burning is so controlled. And apparently on the Willamette River, which is a major waterway in the state of Oregon, they had lighthouses not for the fog, but for the smoke. So they actually built illuminating structures to help barges and whatnot navigate because the smoke was so constant.
But you live in the East Coast, and so do I, and a fire may be somewhere and contained in a specific localized place, but smoke affects more people.
I think we definitely saw that shift happen last summer of 2023 when New York and Montreal had these air quality indexes over 400, and was significantly worse smoke there than in Vancouver at the time. But the wildfires are no longer just a sort of regional problem that BC has, or the Pacific Northwest faces, or the West Coast of North America faces. That it's like the byproduct of these fires that are getting bigger, hotter, burning longer every summer. That it's now like the danger of it is not just what burns, but the danger, health issues for humans at least, and other animals, is now far spread all the way to the East Coast.
Yeah. You, right there in the brown jacket. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Thanks so much for your talks. I had a question about, Liz, you were talking about, artists and the role of art. And I guess I was wondering about, one thing that seems so cool about the books is that it seems like there's a lot of submissions from people who are not, artists. They're people making stuff. Or, and there's an ecologist who writes a poem, or wildfire writer who makes painting. And also I know that it's not published by a publisher, you guys kind of do it by yourself. So I guess I was curious to hear you talk about democratizing access to art and also publishing, and how you think about that as part of the community building or responding to that.
Yeah, well, I think we touched on that about the interdisciplinarity of the book is so important, and that multitude of voices kind of creating, one voice, or maybe just staying as kind of a cacophony of voices. And I think what's so cool about a book is you can't respond to it right away. You can't comment on an Instagram post. You might read something and be like, I don't agree with that, or it's giving me a feeling, or these two things are kind of contradicting each other in the book. And I like that you have to sit with it. I think that's really nice about the format of the book. And then in terms of the process for which we made the book, we made a decision pretty early on that Amory and I wanted to kind of have creative control over the books, and we're like, okay, well, I guess we got to do it ourselves. But it's not that hard. I keep saying this to artists, you can make a book. I don't know, you can have a fundraiser. It doesn't, if you have some skills and can put something together in InDesign, it's you can go with these on-demand printers, and I don't know, talk to us. We'll tell you how to make a book.
It's totally pro.
Well, it's interesting that there's a kind of I think it also allows us, just to add on to what you were saying, that it allows us to not be as political about wildfire, especially with a topic that has such strong reactions, I think, from people about wanting to control it or put it out. This sort of the fear of fire, the danger of fire, the property damage associated with it, all this stuff. That we are able to, as an independent publisher and as the editors of each volume, we're allowed to kind of select a variety of different perspectives and voices, not to have some sort of overall. I don't want to say that we have this we have a political message to deliver to you in these books. The actual purpose is to create space for voices that are normally not heard in discussing these issues, and that predominantly means bringing in people who live in rural areas, who actually experience wildfire firsthand and are sometimes the victims of policies around wildfire mitigation that are made up in cities that are tend to be not very threatened by those policies.
And, I mean, that is something I gotta say.
Publishing, but you had, I'm sorry, I just wanted
Go.
to say that about, I'm assuming I saw the universities there.
No, we publish on our own.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry about that, thank you very much.
But this has a real authority because it isn't an academic publication and it's not a bunch of MFAs. You know, with all no disrespect to MFAs, but the fact that there's a variety. There's a variety of voices in there, and to me that gives it a kind of authenticity. It's an actual sampling of real people who encounter fire in all different ways. And so there's so many different voices in there, you know, some, you know, quite polished people who are clearly schooled in writing and art making, and then other people who are just, you know, really trying to render the rawness of this experience maybe for the first time. And that just gives it this kind of earthy, real, you know, it's tasty. So I just, as a writer and as an interviewer and explorer, you know, traveler type, you know, I really appreciate that. You know, these feel like real tales from the ground, from the woods, from the fire.
Well, I think we also, sort of side effect of it is that we hope that it's kind of encouraging to people. Like it can kind of serve as a model to people who may not feel academically trained in art or creative writing or any form of photography, everything that's in the book. But that it's encouraging to other people who might see it to say, oh, like I have experiences with wildfire or any other thing, and I see regular people just doing something about it, and it could be anything, and it's being heard, and it's being seen, and it's being read and appreciated, and people are learning from it, and that I have a voice too, and I can contribute something too. You should all go out there and make a book.
Yeah. Hi there.
I was wondering if you could all talk about the kind of process of archival research that you've done in your different books, so like in Fire Weather, the kind of history of resource extraction in Alberta, the way you went about that process, and then the kind of like BC Wildfire Service stuff with some fire season books. I mean, if you could talk about your process and why you kind of think through this, like the history of ideology around these topics.
You guys should go. I'll jump in later if you want. But
My archival research, the archival research for fire season happened because I was driving up island and I saw a sign that said BC Forest Discovery Center, and I was at a stoplight on the island highway and I thought, what's that? And I pulled in, and the BC Forest Discovery Center, I don't know if has anyone been? They have a train you can ride? Yeah. They have an old ranger cabin set up to look like it would have looked like in the 60s and 70s. And they had some posters on the wall that were these very slick wildfire propaganda posters. And I was like, these are cool. And I took some photos on my phone and was doing a residency in Swantula and emailed the museum. And I was like, do you guys have an archive I could come visit? And I got an email back from Neil. And he was like, yeah, sure, come on down. And he just found some retired foresters who lived in Duncan who wanted to hang out with me. And their archive is just a bunch of boxes of like stuff that they haven't been able to like get an archivist to actually go through. So I just went through the attic with some retired foresters and I was like, what's this? What's this? What's this? Can I borrow this? Can I borrow this? And they're like, yeah, that's great. So I don't know if that's how you, like most people do archival research, but that's what we've done in the book. And every time, yeah, they're so great. Every time I've gone and asked to like go look at some more stuff, or can we publish this? Can we use this? Can we use this? They're just so happy that people are engaging with the materials that they have. And I just love the generosity of, these retired foresters who will just spend the afternoon with me and answer all my questions. And I just have learned so much from them through that process. And I think that was the thing, we talked about is like visual material about wildfire is not new. Like we have been consuming this for 100 years. We've been looking at Smokey the Bear for how long? We've like been seeing all these messages and also like thinking through images that we see on the media, the very sensationalized images. So that's kind of, we wanted to provide that context, that historical context in the book.
Yeah, I think the inclusion of archival things or finding some, I mean, we have sort of hand-picked one or two people, I think in the first book, who had like academic writing about the history of, John Parmenter we got, who is like an encyclopedia of the history of wildfire in BC. We got a portion of one of his book, I think, that he was working on to provide some historical context. But I think as far as research goes, it's pretty light for us considering we're just the editors. I mean, we do tend to put our own artwork in the books, you know, to pat ourselves on the back. But like,
You can do that when you made it.
that's right. But really what we're doing is we're just creating a space for other people to bring their interests and research and concepts and perspectives to the table. And we've certainly learned a lot along the way from reading everything and looking at everything and hearing from all these contributors. And I think in a part that helps us drive our own research and our own practices, and also helps us kind of fine tune the direction we want the books to go, or it gives us a sharper eye on a certain maybe narrative arc of all the contributions or submissions to a specific volume. Like as we're going through the editing process, we have hundreds of images and written pieces, and we start to piece together this like, okay, how does the book start? What kind of journey are we sending our readers on? What kind of experience, how does this piece lead to this piece, lead to this piece, and then how do we end it? And so I think what we've consumed along the way as far as media and writing and imagery helps us construct a more interesting and entertaining book. But I think that's about as far as research goes for me.
So we got time for one more question. You had your hand up, and then for the rest of you, they will, Liz and Amory will be around selling books over there, so I'm sure they'll be glad to chat. But let's hear your question.
Where do you see this project going? How many more books do you think you'll make?
This is my question too.
I think we've always just said, like, as long as we want to keep making them, we will. We decided to make a book every other year, so we get a year off in between to kind of wait for things to happen, watch the sky, you know, hear from people, let the word spread a little bit more.
I think anytime I've felt a sense of like, okay, maybe this is it, you know, and maybe the third volume, before we looked at the submissions, I remember being like, oh, it is a lot of work to make a book. And then we started going through the submissions, and I was like, oh my God, like we have to like publish this work. Someone needs to read this essay. Someone needs to read this poem. I would put all this work in just so people could see this painting. And I think that it just has this it's like kind of this like perpetual motion machine because of all the work of the contributors that goes into the book. And I don't know, as an artist, sometimes it's like hard to kind of brag about your work, but that doesn't feel like my work. I feel like I'm bragging about 60 people's work. And that feels really easy because the submissions in the book are just so amazing. And yeah, I just going through submissions and being moved by them is like my favorite part of putting the book together. So yeah, indefinitely.
That's great.
As long as it feels like people are still interested and wanting to take part in it, and the community keeps growing, and we want to keep doing it, we'll just keep going.
Yeah.
Okay, we have to stop this phase here, but if we could all give a round of applause to Liz and Amory. It really is so cool.
I just want to say, like, the whole time I just kept thinking, is John Vaillant really saying all this cool stuff about our books? Thank you so much for agreeing to take part in this.
I'm really honored to be part of this. And again, this feels like a missing piece in my work. And so you're really filling in some empty spaces that really needed filling. And I urge you all to check the book out, get a copy, share it with your friends, because this is part of our reality now. And this is such a beautiful refraction of what we're going through together. So thanks again, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to the VPL.